the district's effort to provide in-home learning, attempting to overcome the digital divide for many low-income students. And he has helped the district and become the city's de facto food bank, helping provide millions of free meals to children and adults. Today, the superintendent is going to give us an update on his efforts during this period, and he's also going to talk about LAUSD's real estate portfolio strategy. Prior to the pandemic, the school district was analyzing how it could best utilize its real estate footprint to provide benefit to the community in the form of affordable housing and shelter. We look forward to hearing what his plan is and how we can help support him in this effort. Today's webinar is graciously hosted by our LABC member, Wells Fargo. We thank them for dedicating hundreds of millions of hours to address food, shelter, small business, and housing stability. And we want to thank them for their support today. And I'm pleased to introduce Senior VP of Corporate Philanthropy and Community Relations, Greg Shirkin. Greg.
Good morning, Mary. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. At Wells Fargo, we feel it's our responsibility to help lead the private and corporate sector response to this pandemic by providing support and resources to communities across Los Angeles County, particularly those communities that are most underserved. To do that successfully, it's imperative that we collaborate with organizations like LABC and leaders like Superintendent Beutner to ensure families and students are able to remain housed and continue their education, which is why Wells Fargo is providing $175 million in philanthropic support nationally and more than $9 million locally to respond to this crisis. This includes our support to the Greater LA Education Foundation and other great LA-based nonprofits that are focused on education, ensuring our youth can continue to learn and reach their academic potential during this challenging time. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is a civic leader, philanthropist, public servant, and business executive who has worked for the last decade to make Los Angeles a stronger community. During this time, he served as first deputy mayor of the city of Los Angeles, publisher of the Los Angeles Times, co-chair of the Los Angeles 2020 Commission, co-chair of the LA Unified Advisory Task Force, and he also founded the nonprofit Vision to Learn. Vision to Learn provides free screenings, eye exams, and glasses to children in low-income communities, helping more than 260,000 students in more than 350 cities across the country, excuse me. In May 2018, he was named Superintendent of Los Angeles Unified. He is leading Los Angeles Unified to better connect schools with communities they serve and to help serve the unique needs of each student. With that, please welcome Superintendent Austin Beutner.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Nadine, and all for Los Angeles Business Council for allowing me to share a few thoughts. I appreciate, Mary, in particular, the work you do in helping all of Los Angeles lean forward and imagining a better future for all who live and work in our community. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for allowing me to share a few thoughts. I'll try to be brief because my goal would be to have a conversation. And if we were able to do this in person, we'd be having a bit more of a conversation, but we'll do our best using Zoom and other tools. So let me just take you through some quick highlights of the work we've been doing over the last 8 weeks. It's hard to believe it's been 8 weeks. It feels like 8 months, maybe 8 years for some in the trenches. But what we're trying to do now is actually the same thing we used to do when we were in schools. We try to make sure every student's continuing to learn. We provide support for students and families most in need, and we take care of our more than 75,000 colleagues who work in schools because they're the ones who need to be safe and well to take care of our students and their families. So those still are our guides, and each and every day, probably longer days and weekends and weeks that all run together, but we're still working and focused on the same set of things, even in the midst of this pandemic. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at the outset acknowledge extraordinary times require extraordinary things, and there are so many people who work in Los Angeles Unified who are doing those extraordinary things every day. I hope I have a chance to highlight some of them. Now, let me start first. As Leslie mentioned, we are that safety net for the communities we serve. A quick reminder of the almost 700,000 students in Los Angeles Unified, about 500,000 are in traditional K-12 schools. 80% of the families we serve live in poverty. And that's just a number on a page too many, but it's very real for the families that we serve and the struggle they're in. And that struggle has been made more difficult by this pandemic. If the governor estimated this week, a quarter of Californians will be out of work before this month ends. I've seen estimates that probably half of the families we serve have had a family member disconnected from work. And that's for a family already living in poverty. So we're providing a safety net. As Mary said, we are running the largest food relief effort in the country. Each day we provide more meals, or sufficient meals. To give you some dimension, we could feed every person in Wyoming and Vermont every day at our food centers. This has been a community effort. We've had lots and lots of people, volunteers from the Red Cross, other partners. We've had Mattel donate toys, Seas donate candies, LA84, sporting equipment, books. The community has come together to support this, and we've raised more than $10 million. I see now we're up to $11 million in terms of cash and goods. For anyone so inclined on this call, we set up a charity, LAStudentsMostInNeed.org. And I would just let you know that $20 will provide lunch for a child for a week. So maybe by the end of this, you'll think that you got $20 worth of value. Please, if you think so, LAStudentsMostInNeed.org and provide that. One of the other safety nets that we are providing is mental health support. In ordinary times, there's a great need for our students and their families. We provide counseling and psychiatric support in schools. We're not able to do that now. We've transitioned that to an online, which will soon be a video service. That is open weekdays. We've received many thousands of calls from students. And one of the things we may want to talk about, Mary, when we come back and circle in on these things, there will be an echo on the clinical side. We hear about the second wave and the third wave. We're also anticipating an echo of a different sort of illness when we're back in a more traditional structure in our lives of mental health. And not just children, but families and domestic violence issues, all of the things that trauma in one's life can exacerbate. We expect to see more of that in schools, and the need will be greater. We'll talk about that. Shifting to the next, we decided even before we transitioned to online that we had to make this learning available to all. There was a fork in the road. We could have said, here's some packets, go home. We can't get there. Other school districts, Seattle started that place and said too hard. DC actually is closing schools early because they can't figure it out. We said there is no place to get to other than finding a way to do this. And 8 weeks later, through some extraordinary efforts on behalf of my colleagues, just about every student is connected. And let me just say, let you know why I'm saying just about. We've had extraordinary efforts at every school. We have made phone calls. We've had device distribution days at schools. We partnered with community organizations. But as I reminded my friends at the LA Times when I was publisher, I would begin every morning with answering the emails from someone whose paper was thrown in the bushes or they didn't get their paper that day. And serving almost 500,000 kids, there will always be a family that didn't get the call. The child wasn't present in school. The child has been somehow disconnected, but we're going to continue to make those numbers of 96 or 98%, 100, or as close as we can. We serve a transient population. We have some elementary schools where in the course from kindergarten to 8th grade, only 20% of those who started kindergarten finish at the same school, meaning a transiency of 15% or so each year. The same would be true now. It might even be greater as families suffer from economic dislocation. So some of the families or students who were with us even just 2 months ago may no longer be present at that school or in our community for reasons having little to do with school itself. But we've connected everybody. I liken it to a moonshot. I mean, if we had the dollars and the time, we would have spent about 5 years to plan for this. We would have invested, we would have trained, we would have seen through trial and error what works, what doesn't, and then we would have rolled it out in just a few more weeks than 5 weeks, 8 weeks. We're doing this because we have to. Now with this foundation in place, it's just the foundation. We're trying to see what we can do to keep students learning. And the next part of it for us is making sure our educators, those teachers and principals who are on the front lines in contact with students, next slide, Pedro, are connected and trained. We have provided already the basics for almost 35,000 educators, 10 hours of intensive training, how to master the tools, what is Zoom, how do you share on a Zoom, how are you the moderator, turn everyone else's mic off and on, what's the difference between Classroom Dojo and Google, and what does good practice look like? We now have had almost 14,000 of them sign up for another 30 hours, which are ongoing now, to try to become a master of this. And let me give it context that most of what is talked about in online education today have a real selection bias. It tends to be something that's been tried or used in affluent communities, affluent schools, plenty of resources on both ends, at home and in the school, for the device, for the training, for the tutoring, and all the supports, and most typically provided to a student with a demonstrated aptitude or desire to work independently, which is what's required or necessary to be successful online. Public schools have a broader mandate. We serve every child, irrespective of needs, and including students with learning differences and disabilities. The burden is greater, the challenge is greater, and a lot of what is talked about as what good might look like in online have such a selection bias, it's a little less applicable to the work we're doing. The other thing I would note is we did all of this training and are doing all of this training with no lost instructional days. Some school districts at that initial fork in the road said we're going to shut down for a week or 10 days and try to figure out how to do this. We thought maintaining that connection, that human connection with our students and some learning was more important than no learning and no connection because of the fragility of the family circumstance, the tenuous nature of that connection perhaps. So we kept school work ongoing, we kept instruction going, and I'm really proud our educators have stepped up. We have not lost any instructional days. We didn't take an extra week of vacation. We didn't tell our students, hang in there, we'll call you back in a couple of weeks. We have kept it going throughout. This will provide a foundation, we believe, for the coming summer. This summer will be the first time in the history of Los Angeles Unified where every student will be offered the opportunity to participate in summer school. Think of it as kind of three prongs. The first would be our traditional intensive summer program for just a handful of students, credit recovery work in high school, early learners who are truly struggling. We will offer the middle ground of the foundation pieces in literacy and math for every student at every grade level. And then we're creating what might historically be thought of as enrichment classes, but engaging classes with math and literacy woven in, because we recognize the moment we no longer have that captive audience in the school, we've got to engage the student first. We've got to engage the family. And I'm sure each of you with your own family members at home see just because a student has a device doesn't mean they'll log in. And just because they're logged in doesn't mean they're engaged and paying any attention. I have 4 of my own children at home, and one is a graduate working. The other 3, I've seen every trick in the book so far on how you can turn it in. I haven't seen them use an avatar yet, but we got James Cameron helping us. Maybe he'll inform us. But what we're doing is turning it on its head and saying, well, let's start with what might be interesting to a student. And I'll just choose 2 of these. We have Fender Guitar. We will have the largest virtual middle school class in the world of middle school students learning to play guitar. And Fender's donating the instruments. We have something called the Fender Play app, which has more than 2,500 lessons and world famous instrumentalists as the supplement. We will actually have Los Angeles Unified classroom teachers teaching this, complemented by all that Fender and the excitement and the energy they can bring. We're working alongside Illumination, who are gifted at telling stories, and they'll teach our students how to draw, how to animate and tell a story. And there's a lot of math, there's a lot of literacy, and there's a lot of engagement and agency one can find in telling one's own story. And I mentioned already James Cameron, who is going to take us on a magical voyage of the Titanic. We hope this is something that also will come with us back to school when we are back to school. As Mary or Greg mentioned, August 18th, the new school year will begin. We don't yet know what that will look like. Science will guide us. That's the foundation. Just a note of caution, when we made the determination we needed to close school facilities for the safety of our school community. And that means staff, students, family members, visitors. Put it in some context, in an average Friday in the fall with football games and the like, we might have as many as 1 million people on our campuses, between students, staff, family members, visitors, the band, musical performances, and everything else. We have a school or schools that serve a broader community. GALA, which is Girls Academic Leadership Academy, with 500 students, connects to siblings and children of employees in that school, with schools with another 50,000 students who go home to 200,000 family members. So 500 students connected to 250,000 people in Los Angeles. The science has to be our guide. Moving the desks apart is going to be the easy part. Is what does the science tell us what is safe? And when we closed on March 13th, there were no occurrences in our schools, none. And while we closed a matter of days before New York City schools, from an epidemiology standpoint, we closed about a month before. New York had several hundred incidences in its schools when it closed, and you can see some consequence of that spread. We closed with no occurrence. There are now more than 30,000 occurrences. Scientists tell us the virus is more contagious than they originally thought, and that individuals, including children without symptoms, can be carriers. So 8 weeks in, the science is actually more cautionary than it would have been even on March 13th. We recognize in the long run, there is no economy without education. Without the public school students we're educating, Los Angeles, there is no future of the economy in Los Angeles. In the very short term, the economy is also a fraction of its former self unless schools are open. So we're trying to strike a balance there. We're working with our labor partners, county health officials. We have a work team alongside scientific experts from UCLA to advise us on the testing and the science and the virology. And for instance, we are just participating now with the county on the first test of children. All of the tests that you read about, who has, who doesn't, and so on and so forth, are heavily skewed toward adults. Not necessarily purposeful, but there has not been a purposeful test of children uniquely, which is important to us, and that work is ongoing. So August 18th will be the start of the new school year, whether we're physically in facilities or in some hybrid model. We'll know more in the weeks and months to come. Meanwhile, we're focused on making summer as great an opportunity as it is for our students to continue to learn in different ways. Let me shift a little bit to the real estate side of the house. These facts, figures are probably familiar to most of you, but to give you some dimension, serving almost 700,000 students over 710 square miles, we have almost 1,400 schools, 80 million square feet of facility, and about 10 square miles of land. We're the biggest landowner in Los Angeles. We're the biggest landlord in Los Angeles. And we are bigger than the city of Los Angeles. We cover, from a personal standpoint, we cover about half of the students in the Los Angeles County area. It's imperative to us that we use the real estate we have with a few guiding principles, which will carry us forward in our work. And the first would be, I can't see, Pedro, did you put up the guiding principles?
Yes.
Okay, you got them, I don't. Good. Starting with the first, we are an educational institution. So everything we do is going to be aligned with that educational mission and aligned with the communities we serve. And the needs of Boyle Heights are different than Wilmington, different than Chatsworth. We are not one monolithic community, and the needs are different. So priority number one is to make sure our real estate is used to serve that. The second, we believe we can help address the issue of affordable housing in the community, in particular to address the needs of those who work in schools. We have teachers, custodians, and cafeteria workers who commute more than 2 hours each day to the school they work at. That's not a lifestyle we expect someone to be able to maintain, and it makes it harder for us to have committed individuals who live and work and stay in that same school community for a longer period of their careers. We are going to work to see what we can do to create a pool of affordable housing to use in particular to focus on employees. that will serve the needs of the overall community, as it will also take housing pressure off other parts of the community. And the last is made more acute by this uncertain budget picture. We're going to need to realign the space we have, starting with our administrative space, looking carefully what we do downtown and other very high cost areas. This is not a realignment of school facilities. Those 1,386 are staying right where they are. We're going to listen very carefully to the community and how we best serve the community going into the future. But certainly anything we can do to realign our administrative space, we're going to do. And I think coming this week, when we hear from the governor about the state budget, and like is going to put enormous pressure on us to use every bit of resource we have. Just a brief note on the budget. Schools in California are funded by the state. We all pay taxes locally, money goes to the state, comes back. It's important to note, this is not, the funding level is not set by Los Angeles Unified or the Board of Los Angeles Unified, it's set by the state. To give you just a frame of reference, private schools in Los Angeles probably invest close to $50,000 a year in a student. Public schools in New York, close to 30. And our schools are asked to make do with about 17. And that gap between 17 and 30, we've talked about before. You see the symptoms in a math class with 35 kids or a school library without a librarian. And we see it, or did see it, in students without devices, students without access to the internet. So the symptoms of chronic underfunding are with us. If we're looking at further cuts, it's going to go in the wrong direction, not the right direction. And I guess if I make the case for public education most simply, it's a cumulative exercise. And the old adage is true, and one can't walk away from it, which is you teach a child to read so she can read to learn. And that's foundation. And there is study after study which tell us that child who learns to read by 3rd grade has a bright and promising future. And the child who doesn't is 4 times more likely to drop out, more likely to be incarcerated, has a very, very different future. You can't defer education. Cuts to the school budgets when 97% of our dollars are in schools means there will be cuts at schools, means there will be children who will struggle to read, and we understand what that means for their lifetimes. I recognize, like many, how the state collects revenues and everything else. These are uncharted waters for everybody, including those at the state. I would just urge all who are part of those conversations to recognize some things can be deferred, some things can't. There's a consequence to every decision that's made, and I hope those who weigh those decisions understand and think about that 2nd grader who's struggling to learn to read. If we don't give her the shot now, we can't go back in 3 years and say, guess what, the economy's recovered, here's another shot, it's too late. So education and the imperative to adequately fund it is made harder in these times, and we're going to have to relook at some of the choices that historically have been made at the state level. The last, going back to real estate and what our work plan is, we had a task force that Wendy Gruhl and LaFonza Butler had headed up, together with advice from Wayne Ratkovich and others, brought in HRNA to look at what we have. That report will soon be released. We will be working alongside Urban Land Institute, so Kev and others are going to help us provide their expertise. Some of the members, I think, actually, Mary, are part of your group as well, but we're delighted to have the community work alongside us. These are complex real estate and land use issues as we think about how to pursue affordable housing in the communities we serve. We will make sure, and we need to engage the communities, because these are community assets being used to serve the community, and the voice of the community matters greatly to us. And once all of those steps have gone through, once we have a plan that makes sense and we think is actionable, once the community is in support of that, has had a chance to reflect on it and help us tailor it to the needs of individual communities, we'd expect to take this to our board for their ultimate approval and implementation in a matter of months, not years. This is going to be an exercise that we embark on very aggressively this calendar year, because it's needed, both the affordable housing and the rationalization of our administrative real estate. So with that, that is just a quick overview. I didn't touch on a lot of things we're working on because I wanted to keep it brief and allow time for a conversation. But Mary, I appreciate your allowing me just to share a few thoughts, and I really would welcome questions from you or any of your colleagues.
Thank you, Superintendent, and I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have time for a couple of questions? It's 10:27.
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay, then I'd like to start with, first of all, saying how impressive it is what you have done and how much we appreciate it, because that was yeoman's work. I mean, what you just said about what should have taken 3 years, you had to do in 8 weeks. You did it, and a lot of students in LAUSD are going to be saved by that. So first of all, a thank you, and to all the people that work with you for everything that you're doing. I have 2 students in my house on Zoom, so I fully appreciate what that looks like for parents in the broader Los Angeles. In addition to that, I'd like to go back to this issue of the $17,000 per student.
Yep.
The first question is really addressing that. And with the potential, worst case scenario of the state issuing a 20% reduction, right, to the district, to all districts in California, what can we do to help you with the governor and the legislature, make sure that this is a priority for funding? I know the governor, this is a priority to the governor, but we're really worried about this 17,000 not being further reduced because of the budget. And we'd like to know how we can help you.
Thank you. Quick note, it will be more costly when we go back. We're going to have to invest in personal protective equipment and cleaning schools. Sanitizing schools is harder than just cleaning schools, more intensive. Students will need masks. Students and families will need tests, and where the funding is going to come from to pay for those. I mentioned earlier, we'll need more mental health support in our schools, not less. And this heroic effort by my colleagues to connect every student needs to be maintained, in particular if we're probably looking at a hybrid learning model of some sort going on into the future. I think the challenge, Mary, is a couple-fold. First, it is to be advocates for kids. Any budget conversation is a reflection or a values conversation, not a dollars and cents conversation. And if we are in alignment that values lead to choices, choices means something has a priority over something else, the first place to start is kids are at the top of the list. I penned a little piece today for the Los Angeles Times. I'm a big fan of the zoo. I love animals. I take my children there. They're a little older now. We used to go regularly. If I had to choose between my children, I'll make this very personal, learning to read or a few less hours at the zoo, in the very short term, that's a choice I'm prepared to make. I drive over potholes like every other Angelino. If I had to choose between a child learning to read and hitting the same pothole week after week, I'll fix a few more flats in my car. It's where does education rank as a priority for the state? That's first. The second is, and you and your members are particularly good at this, which is to find solutions for pieces of this that don't all come to the same place, which is the state's general fund budget. I mentioned the need to invest in technology, for instances. I grew up in an era when every one of us was connected. There was something called Lifeline Access. Everyone had a phone. It was wired, attached to the wall. You could call anybody. Whether you were from a family living in poverty or the most affluent family in town, everyone's connected, and the same 10-cent stamp took your thoughts around the country, if not around the world. We went to wireless and we left that behind somehow. Well, the same mechanisms where a utility commission would surcharge everybody's phone bill just a very little bit to make sure those who couldn't afford it had it, we should transition that model. If you look at the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars spent on telecommunications and internet access in the state of California, both wireless and plugged, is it a 0.5%? I don't know what it might be, but if we could create a trust, a fund to say, let's fund that for every kid. The 6 million kids in public education, not just those in Los Angeles Unified, need to be connected. That's doable. That shouldn't require the general fund of the state if we just look more cleverly. So I think 2 things, Mary. First is just the collective voice that public education is a priority and it matters. And then the second is willingness to roll up in sleeves and look at individual pieces of this to see if we can't find solutions that stand the test of time to help provide the funding that's going to be needed.
No, I hear you. And for those of us that are old enough, we remember the E-rate and an attempt to do that. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly. And E-rate needs to be rolled forward, and bring in internet access and wireless is all part of that formula, and the dollars would be there.
yeah, well, we welcome following up with you. And as you know, I live with someone who thinks that's important. So we without doubt will be helping you with that. Okay.
Thank you.
Then I'd like to go to two other issues. One is this relationship between opening the schools in some hybrid fashion and how that supports people being able to go back to work. Because like you said, you have 80% of the kids in LAUSD are Title I. So that means their parents need to work. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship, about how having students be able to go to school allows their parents to work?
Yeah, we in normal times, living in poverty means the safety net school provides, the structure. It's a safe place for your child to be during the day. It's 1, 2, or 3 warm meals. It's an after-school activity, so you can be at work and your child's safe.
Yeah.
Safety first. And if school facilities are not open, too many of our families are now struggling to say, how do I keep my child safe if I have to go back to work to earn a living? So we're going to be looking at different models. Hybrid might be a few days a week at a facility, a few days a week online. One of the challenges we'll have, like many enterprises, is how do you maintain social distance? As I referred to earlier, moving the desks apart. Easier to imagine physically in an elementary classroom where smaller number of kids, but also the same students are in the same class. So you could shrink a class to 10 or 12 and the same 10 or 12 would be together all day. It gets complicated in a hurry in high school where even if a class is 10 students, that student may have 7 different classes. And I don't think health authorities will think that one student amongst 70 during the course of the day is the same as one student amongst 10. So it's going to be complicated, but we recognize by the time August rolls around, we're going to need a solution. Exactly what that solution looks like, we don't know yet. And it's going to be complicated. I think the other thing that my hope is elected leaders and health authorities start to talk about the risks all of us have as we reopen. As I mentioned at the outset, we're 8 weeks in, nothing's happened as far as a vaccine or treatment. Even the testing itself is still episodic, not always conclusive, and certainly not ubiquitous and free. Yes, we feel the pressure. Yes, we understand the connection to the economy. But as we go down this path to think about reopening, because we'll have to as part of a functioning society, I hope we're having an honest conversation about the risks that everyone involved is taking in doing so. We closed in what I'll call a riskless environment. We closed where there were no occurrences in schools. There are more than 30,000 now. It won't be down to 0 by August. So we'll be looking at some sort of hybrid model, recognizing the risks are different.
Right. You have to put safety first.
Absolutely.
For sure. Last question. And we really appreciate your time. And this is very important to the LABC as well as Wells Fargo and Greg and others because of the community implications of your supporting the use of your land for affordable housing and low-income housing. So the question is, will your model look like Metro's joint development program where it provides below market ground leases to private developers? Will it include a certain percentage of affordable housing? And what's your timeline on this? And I think you did address that actually.
Yeah, the timeline, we expect to we are beginning the work and have begun the work already. It'll become more public as we go forward to engage communities and partners like ULI help us sort out. The boundaries for us, a little bit different than a traditional affordable housing developer. We own the land already. That's a comparative advantage. So from a cost or structural standpoint, we have a little more flexibility than others. If we are leaning into the issue of making housing affordable for our workforce, because that's how we better serve students,
Right.
Then some of the traditional structures in affordable housing, the AMI levels are different. Simply put, a teacher might not qualify, but if they're commuting 2 hours a week from some distant location because they can't afford to live there, we have an affordability crisis for teachers in our schools, even though technically some of the federal statutes might define it differently. Don't have all the answers to that yet, Mary. We're going to be working through some of those issues. And we're going to have to be creative in terms of how we finance it. But the goal is to make housing more affordable for those in schools and the community as a whole. And if you look at our almost 1,000 campuses spread in the communities we serve, one could envision a 10-acre campus at a middle school taking an acre and a half out of the corner without changing the instructional program or service to students and putting in 40 units. That would be honor the spirit and feel of the community and allow teachers and cafeteria workers to live and work in that same community. And that's the balance we're going to have to strike. We're really pleased to have ULI and I think some of the members of your team helping us think through those issues.
Well, we would welcome supporting you in that. We actually supported LAUSD under Romer in that effort and the superintendents after that in that effort to start to put housing on LAUSD properties. Now, it took a long time, as you know, you've probably been briefed, to get one of those up and running.
Hopefully we learned some things, and my goal is to see it happen a little bit quicker than
more quickly. Yes, particularly under these emergency rules where things tend to move more quickly. So with that, I want to thank you, offer our support in several of these endeavors that you mentioned, and we look forward to working with your team on these. And I want to thank Greg for his support and Wells Fargo's continued support in their effort to look at how the COVID-19 has impacted our housing crisis in California, which we talked a little bit about today. And I want to plug the fact that on this Thursday afternoon, we will have a second webinar in a series on sustainability. As you know, Superintendent, one of our favorite subjects, with Mary Nichols and David Hochschild, and Sammy Roth from the LA Times will be moderating that. And we would welcome you back, Superintendent, at any time to participate. Today, you graciously agreed to do this with our members only. I think Nadine Watt, our chair, graciously agreed. But if we do have webinars with a much bigger database of individuals. And so I think when you have these plans in place, we would love to have you back to sort of be able to talk about what the real estate plan looks like.
Good. Yeah, we look forward to that. We have a little more detail and as the weeks and months progress. Thank you for that opportunity. I'm sure we'll be back to do that.
Okay, good. And in the short term, these issues up in Sacramento, where we're quite active on other issues, we could add some new chores that you have suggested. And I think putting student first is right. We have to put students first.
Good. Well, thank you. And I appreciate everyone taking the time to be part of this today.
Thank you. And Greg, do you have a final thought?
Oh, thanks, Mary. And thank you, Superintendent Beutner. We just wanted to offer my thanks and congratulations on your pursuit of the affordable housing solutions. Wells Fargo is currently working with the county to develop and build some pilot models to best study what would be some options in terms of affordable housing solutions. To the extent that would be of interest to you and LAUSD, we would certainly welcome some additional collaboration and coordination with you and your team. Good.
Well, thank you for that. We'll take you up on that. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, and stay safe and well, Greg and Superintendent Austin.
Thank you.
All
Bye
right.
now.
Take care.